Hi there, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you? So, yeah, I just thought it would be fun to hang out with you guys and talk a bit about what we're up to. Um, and I thought maybe with a smaller group, it would be possible to like kind of dive a little bit more into the detail of like what is going on behind the scenes in terms of like how our operation is working and like why things are proceeding the way that they do, because generally generally the things that people want to know about are like basically just like when are there going to be big partnership announcements or you know those sorts of things. But for us, like the reality is very different. We're very much focused on all sorts of different operational challenges and weird problems we have to solve, and um, you know the interesting people that we're meeting and hiring and all of that. And I just thought that it might be interesting for some of the people who are most invested in the project to get to talk a bit about that layer of what's going on. Um, so I guess why don't I start off by just sharing a little bit of that, a little bit of my thoughts and observations about like the project and how it's going on that level, and then I'm really curious to know like what you guys would be interested in. Happy to talk more about that. I'm also interested to hear from you guys about your perspectives and ideas about where we are. So um, so I guess first off, let me just talk a little bit about how our platform actually works. And I use the word platform to refer to the app. This is how we refer to it internally a lot, or at least I do, because it's meant to be. It's basically it's a service that you can access through an app, and the vision is for people to be able to access it through like a web portal that will feel kind of like a mobile or like a home banking interface, and potentially through a desktop portal as well that might feel like a sort of professional trading or brokerage kind of application that maybe like a CFO at a big company would use in the future, but it's all the same platform, right? So it's all one technological system running on one set of servers that people can access through these different interfaces. And so, as you guys know, I think the vision for that platform is to take stable crypto and make it really practically useful and usable by ordinary people and businesses. We're probably not going to try to add like margin trading or something, but we probably are going to try to add like payroll, and built-in accounting and other things that you need if you're moving millions of dollars back and forth for your company treasury, or you're paying tens of thousands of employees. We want to support all of that normal use. And so in terms of how the platform works today, so I think as everybody knows, we have this app interface that runs on Android right now and will work for iPhone soon. But I think that it might be a little bit confusing, like how does the app actually work? Like what's actually happening? Why is it that people are excited about it in like Venezuela and Argentina? And so mechanistically, the way that it works is that we've sort of carved out a model that's kind of halfway between Coinbase and local Bitcoins, if you will. So local Bitcoin, the way that that works is anybody can sort of sign up to this website and post an offer saying that they're willing to buy or sell Bitcoin at a certain price, certain quantity, with like a certain bank. And then you can basically go look through those ads. It's almost like you're looking through Craigslist or like a classifieds site and pick somebody and then like do a peer-to-peer transaction with them where you're actually chatting with them and exchanging information, and then you do this transaction. And it's almost like eBay for buying and selling Bitcoin online. And it does work, but it's really clunky and it's kind of scary if you're new to it, because it's like, who's this person, and how do I know if their ratings mean that they're actually going to not scam me? And it's just you have to like talk to a new random person every time in order to do it. So we thought, okay, that's cool. It's cool that that's working, and it's cool that that's kind of censorship resistant, because you have so many different people sort of processing those payments, if you will. But it seems like that won't really work for a mass audience of people using crypto as money, because it's so weird and kind of confusing and maybe scary. Where then on the other hand, you have something like Coinbase, where it's obviously super easy to use. It's like an amazing product. I love it. We use it as a business. But if you're in a country like Venezuela, you just can't open a Coinbase account, and you can't just move your crypto to Coinbase and sell it for dollars and move those dollars to a bank account if you're in a place like Venezuela. And that's because due to the way that Coinbase is super centralized, they don't have a whole lot of flexibility because of the sort of regulatory regime that they fall under. It's just one company, and they have to sort of pick their battles. They have to pick which banks they're going to work with and which clients they're going to serve. And so we kind of looked at those two ends of the spectrum, and we asked ourselves, well, could we create something in the middle? Something that tries to create an experience that's smoother, more like Coinbase, maybe not exactly like Coinbase, but more in that direction, but still has a decentralized mechanism, so that we didn't have like a single entity that was constrained in the way that a centralized exchange is, but instead we had a much bigger number of payment processors who are actually doing those financial transactions. And so that's how the Reserve platform works. So when you go to make a deposit, let's say that you're going to deposit Venezuelan bolivars to get Reserve dollars, you actually, like when you tap the deposit button and you type a number into the app, you get matched within a few seconds to one of the payment processors that's online that's processing Venezuelan bolivar transactions in that moment. And the number fluctuates depending on how many of our partner payment processors are online at that moment, but that number can grow to a pretty large size. So over time, as we scale up, that might be hundreds or even thousands of essentially small businesses in each country that process payments for Reserve users. And unlike local Bitcoin, it's not the case that anybody can just come and join. It's not like eBay where anyone can go and buy and sell. We carefully seek those partners out and we vet them, and we take responsibility for their behavior. So if one of them were to scam one of our users, which so far hasn't happened because we've been very careful about who we bring into the network, we would cover that. Like we would make the user whole. And so what that means is we don't have to show the user a bunch of complicated information about the payment processor they're transacting with, because we're basically saying, don't worry about it, we'll cover it. You can trust this party, you can basically treat this party as part of Reserve, because we sort of take responsibility for their behavior, and we also have made sure to only work with payment processors that provide high quality, fast service. So but what that means is we don't have our own bank accounts or company or companies in Venezuela. We don't need to, because our payment processors are industry veterans that have already been doing foreign exchange in the country for a long time. So they have their bank accounts set up, and they have their corporate entities and their local compliance programs and all of that. And so it makes it so that we as a project don't have to spend our time worrying about those local regulations and local sort of situations, because those payment processors are experts already and they understand it, and they're the ones actually doing those financial transactions. So that helps achieve that vision of making it so that we can actually offer a broader number of services to people in a broader set of countries, which, as everyone knows, is really important to us as a project, but still put together a service that is sort of fast and slick, like transacting with Coinbase. So mechanistically, again, if you go to make that Bolivar transaction, where you want to deposit bolivars or Argentine pesos for that matter, or Colombian pesos, and end up with a reserve dollar balance, once you hit the button in the app and type in an amount, you're given a bank account for whichever payment processor you get matched with by our system. And then you have to go out of the app, which I don't like. That's something that maybe we can improve in the future, allow you to connect your bank account so that you never have to leave the app. But right now you have to go out of the app and then make a transaction on like your mobile banking app or your desktop home banking interface to the to the account number that you were given. And then once you make that transaction, within something between 30 seconds and maybe 2 or 3 minutes, that transaction gets recognized on the other end, and your reserve dollars have showed up in your app. And so that's part of what is like really kind of magical and exciting about the service that we're offering, is that even in countries that have traditionally not had really free access to digital dollar banking services, you can all of a sudden effectively convert your money into digital dollars very quickly and very easily, and without having to worry about being scammed. Because normally, if you're not using a service like this, you might have to go onto like social media and say, hey, I want to buy $20 or I want to buy $100. Is anybody selling? And you just have to find some person who you get to through your friends or family or social network, who has money in a bank account or in cash, and then just arrange a transaction with them. So sometimes you might meet up in a public place, or if it's a digital transaction, you might do it remotely, but there's always a risk there that you send the money and they don't send the money, right? So if it's not a person that you know and trust, then that can be a challenge. And so in practice, it might often take somebody 48 hours to find someone and arrange a transaction. Compare that to you open an app, you tap these buttons, and within a few minutes your transaction's done and you didn't have to worry about being scammed. That's why it's such a big deal. And so that's kind of the original basis of what draws people to the app, is usually that foreign exchange capability, and that goes both ways. People really do want to move money both in and out of these volatile currencies like Argentine pesos and Venezuelan bolivars. You might think that people only want to move money out of those currencies into dollars, because that would be sort of logical, but oftentimes people have earned money abroad and gotten paid with PayPal or Uphold or US dollars into a bank account, and then they actually want to convert that money from dollars into something like Venezuelan bolivars because there's a transaction they want to make that has to be made in that currency. They're still the national currencies, even though they lose value, and so there still are lots and lots of transactions that happen digitally every day in those local currencies. So the ability to move money quickly in either direction is pretty attractive. But something that's pretty cool and pretty exciting for the team right now is that we're starting to see a significant increase in the amount of transactions that are happening purely in RSV, in reserve dollars, back and forth within the app, because there started to be enough people with the reserve app that you can actually just transact back and forth that way. And that transaction experience is basically like Venmo or Cash App. I haven't used like Revolut, but it's probably similar in that it's a simple modern app with a modern interface. You just type in a number, type in a person's username, or you can look them up by phone number, and then send them the money. And it's instant and free. And so that that experience is also great for users, and it's like I said, it's really exciting for us that we're starting to see those network effects form already, even though we're still at like, a very small number of users in the grand scheme of things. So people sort of come in the door often because of that foreign exchange capacity, but it's quickly becoming something where people are using the built-in functionality to send dollars back and forth instead of converting in and out of the local currencies. And we're seeing a rising number of people who in the app, they end up with a dollar balance and they've never moved money in or out through our foreign exchange services. So they just create an account, and then somehow, somebody wanted to transact with them, they receive reserved dollars, and they just hold them, and then maybe they send them on to another user without ever having converted in or out of the other currencies. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty exciting. I guess I want to talk a little bit about what these early users mean to us and the way that we're thinking about the numbers and who's joining. So there's this weird thing when you're doing something new like this where it's like your first 10 users are like an extremely big deal, because it's like, wow, we actually got 10 people to use this thing and keep using it and really like it. Like if you can get just 10 people to use a new product and actually really like it and continue to want to use it and like tell their friends about it, that's like a major accomplishment for a new product. Because when you really get into the details of providing a service for people are picky. They want very specific things. They're scared of many things. So it's like you might have an idea for something that people would like, and actually they would like it, but you didn't really realize that they have a lot of anxiety about certain aspects of that kind of service, and so on and so forth. So just getting your first 10 users is like super exciting, and that helps kind of de-risk, like, okay, the idea isn't completely crazy. And then when you get like your first 100 users, you're like, oh wow, okay, so it's not just my friends and family pretending to like it. It's like people that I don't know, and maybe they're starting to pay for it. So again, it's like really significant validation that the thing's not crazy. When you get to your first it's going to depend on the service you're offering, but if you get to say your first 10,000 users, then it's like, okay, at that point you're like, all right, there's like basically, there's very little risk in comparison at that point that the people aren't going to want this service, especially if the people that are using it are pretty representative of the general population at that point. And you're starting to prove something else at that point. It's not just about, do people want it? You're starting to prove that you actually can offer that service at some meaningful degree of scale, where it's frequently the case that you can put together a service that's great, that people love if you're only offering it to 10 or 100 people, but then if you get to 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000, it just turns out you can't really offer the service as well, for all sorts of different operational reasons. And so we're kind of the stage that we're in the project, and the way that we're thinking about it internally, and most of the stuff that we spend all day every day dealing with has to do with as we've talked about, this word scalability. But what does that actually mean? So it's like trying to think of some good examples here. So it's so one major thing right now is, as I described, there's this process for depositing and withdrawing money in and out of the app. Well, it's kind of a weird process. It's kind of weird to be in an app and then be told, okay, go to your banking app and make this transaction, and then come back and your money will be here. And it's sort of like, what? How does that work? And there are all sorts of things that could go wrong there. The user might come back and say, yes, I did the transaction, and here's the reference number, but they might mistype the reference number, or they might have copied and pasted a different reference number than we wanted them to. Or, there's all sorts of little things that can happen that aren't exactly the the happy path, as we call it, the sort of like straightforward, successful flow. And so because of that, like that's where technical support creeps in. So we have to spend quite a lot of time all day, every day. Like this is happening live right now. We have tons of customer support people answering people's questions like as I talk, because it's like, hey, I sent this transaction, but my money hasn't showed up. Like, what's going on? And sometimes customers might even be angry. They might think that we're scamming them because it's their first time using the service and they were nervous about it. They're like, what the hell? Like, where's my money? I'm going to report you to the police if you don't fix this. We sometimes get messages like that. And so we, at this point, are able to, like, we're achieving a customer support to active customer ratio of like about 500 to 1. So basically that means that like a reserve support team member can like basically serve 500 active customers, doing their transactions throughout the course of the week. And that ratio has improved because we've improved our systems a little bit, but that's still really bad compared to what we will eventually need to get to. So in comparison, a well-developed service that's sort of where all the kinks have been worked out and the service has been made totally scalable, like PayPal or Cash App, is going to achieve a ratio closer to 15,000 to 1. So that's like 30 times the number of customers being supported per support team member, compared to what we are achieving today. And that might sound like a bad situation. It's like, oh, whoa, like that means your system sucks. And the answer is like, well, yeah, it does. Like the system does suck in some ways. But it's a very natural stage for a startup project to go through, where it's like, you start off with like, maybe like 10 people serving 10 customers. And then you continually grow that ratio over and over and over again until you get to something like that ratio of like 15,000 to 1 is kind of the target I have in my head. So, so like right now, we are, one thing that we're spending a bunch of time on is like, okay, well, we chose to use Zendesk in order to serve customer support queries. And, it turns out that the way that it integrates with React Native on Android, there's this weird glitch that we haven't been able to solve. We've been on the phone with the Zendesk team forever and they haven't been able to solve it. And so we're to the point of like evaluating other options. Like, oh man, do we have to like totally switch the, chat software that we're relying on? Should we build something ourselves? So like these are the kinds of things that end up taking, our hours and our days. Is like, we have to solve every little concrete problem in reality like that in order to continually hone and improve the service, so that it works better for our customers. So like, for example, with that chat issue that we're handling right now, as a customer in the Reserve app, there's this terrible thing that happens sometimes, or even frequently, where you go and you open a support chat and you're chatting with somebody, and then you like switch away to a different screen of the app in order to go check like, oh, well, what reference number did I put in or whatever? And you go back and the chat has closed and a new one opens. So now you get connected to a new customer support team member, which obviously is like the most annoying thing ever. It's like, okay, I have to explain my whole situation again because I got disconnected. Like I just went to go get the information. So it sounds like a silly thing. And it sounds like something that should be easy to fix, and we all thought it was going to be easy to fix. But then it's like, okay, the way that the Zendesk API works, there's like a challenge with doing that, all the way to the point where we might have to switch to using a different provider. So I'm talking about this, not because it's exciting and full of hype, and not because it's gonna like signal that like the RSR price is going to go up. The point is to like sort of add a little bit of a layer of detail and reality to what things are like, and sort of the things that have to be handled to make all of this work behind the scenes. So that's just one tiny example, but we have like we published the other day, we have like 61 people on the team at this point, and we're, some team members are operational, so they're just sort of serving customers and doing transactions, and then everybody else is just working on those problems all day, every day, or every weekday, in order to figure out, okay, what's the next way that we're going to handle this that's going to scale to 10 or 100 times the size that we're handling now. What are our bottlenecks going to be next, and how do we fix those things before they become issues, and so on and so forth. So it's a fun time. Like it's an exciting time because, like I said, we've reached this point where it's really, really clear that people want this. Like way more people want to be using the service than we can support cleanly right now. And so it's fun because, we know that like every time we do a release that improves the service, we can allow more people to join and pretty quickly grow and serve those new users. But it's like the problem, this is something I've explained to the team, it's like the problem is not competition at this point. The problem is just the logistics and operational challenges in reality of offering this service at scale, which is a pretty hard thing to do. There's like a whole lot of innovation that's gone into making it work to this point. There's a whole lot more that will come up as we make it bigger. I guess the last thing I'll say is, there's like a natural question of like, okay, well, why not talk about more of the details? Why not talk about more of the numbers of what's going on right now? For a long time, the reason, as we disclosed to the community, not to talk about the numbers was basically we wanted to figure out a bunch of those problems in relative peace. We didn't want to signal to the market that this is an interesting problem to solve and invite a lot of competitors. And I always feel a little bit weird about that, because from a humanitarian perspective, you sort of want competitors. Like, it's kind of good for many people to be trying to solve these problems, not just us. So I go back and forth about that. But anyway, that's why we did that originally. We've reached a point where, honestly, I'm no longer concerned about sharing the numbers from the perspective of inviting competition, because we do have a pretty clear head start. We figured out a lot of stuff. And the reasons not to do it right yet now are a little bit different. And the weird thing is that I can't actually talk in detail about what the reasons are. So now we have this other reason. It's kind of a weird reason. It's something that I can't really talk about in public. But we're working to like basically handle that reason. And I hope that we can do that within, I don't know, I hope like a month. And once we do that, then we'll feel free to talk about these numbers and sort of go around and tell the story of what's been happening with Reserve. Because as you guys know, I think you guys experience this. You're some of the core supporters of the project. You're out there talking, on Twitter and elsewhere about what it is that we're doing, being sort of like, hey, people, like, check this out. This is really cool. And a lot of people out there are like, yeah, I don't know. It seems like kind of a random crypto project. I don't really know anything about it. It doesn't seem that cool. Come back when you have numbers, right? And so it's kind of an interesting situation where we have this thing going that's like super, super exciting for the people on the inside watching it, and for our users in Venezuela and Argentina and Colombia, and for you guys, because you're paying really close attention and you can see what's going on. And so the plan is, once we sort out that other constraint, to try to explain more thoroughly to the world at large, hey, this is what's happening. Here's this interesting thing happening in crypto, where cryptocurrency is being used by ordinary people and businesses on a pretty significant scale, kind of for the first time, and in a really meaningful and exciting way. And so, for the past year or so, I get inquiries from reporters and podcasters and, YouTubers, and so on, being like, hey, can we do an interview? I want to tell the story of Reserve. And we've always said, not right now, but like, we'll come back to you. And so I'm excited for the time where we can basically get back to all those people and be like, all right, now's the time. Let's talk about it. Let's sort of tell this story to the world. So I have a lot of anticipation for doing that. I think it's going to be, I think it's just going to be fun. It's going to be fun to talk about it. I think a lot of people will be excited about it. But there's, some stuff that we still have to handle before we can do it. So that's where we're at with that. So I hope that some of that is interesting to you guys, and happy to answer further questions you have on that level of kind of like how things work behind the scenes, if you're curious about that. And like I said before, also interested in your ideas. What interesting things are you seeing in crypto that maybe we aren't tracking, or thoughts you have about Reserve and where we're at.
Hello, Nevin. It's Arnaud from Glasgow. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Very much appreciated. If I can go back to the scalability issues that you're facing, at this stage, are you worried about what you're facing, or have you got the set of challenges that you've got? Have you got an idea on how to overcome them, and a timeline on how you can overcome them? What's the situation really?
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, these things are kind of cyclical in a way where it's like you realize a new issue, and usually, we have like very smart, very driven people on the team. So usually within literally hours of discovering a new issue, communication has started to occur and ideas have started to form. And so sometimes we have a period of like a few hours where it's like, oh shit, like how are we going to handle this? And then usually within a few hours, we're like, okay, we're pretty sure we can handle it this way. But then there can sometimes be long periods of execution where you have to figure out all the little details to actually show that your solution is really going to work. And so there's always some uncertainty there. And sometimes we spend, weeks thinking we're going to solve a problem one way. And once we've finally gotten all the way into the weeds to actually, write some code or actually, implement a new like legal agreement with a new partner or something, we're like, okay, that didn't quite work. There was this assumption that was flawed, and so we had to switch what we're doing. So right now, there aren't any big problems that have been really recently discovered. So I have in my own head, like pretty much what I think the answer is to each of the problems that are on the table. But there are some things where there's some uncertainty. And that's kind of inherent to the situation. It's kind of the thing where you don't really know 100% until everything has actually been built and is actually functioning in reality. So I guess I know that that's kind of like a cop-out answer. It doesn't directly answer your question. If I try to maybe give you a more direct answer, it's something like, if 10 out of 10 is like, everything is like perfectly planned out and we've tested it all and we actually like know from past experience that exactly this solution will work for everything. And then like 0 out of 10 is like, we have lots of problems and we just have no idea about how we're going to fix them. I think we're operating around like a 7, maybe like a 6, maybe a 6 or a 7, which is like kind of where you often spend your days when you're in startup mode. So it's like, I don't think that we have like more confusing risk than other projects out there. But we definitely don't have like certainty on everything that we're handling.
Okay, can I just take an example, and then I can leave the time to someone else to ask another question. For example, you said earlier that the action of someone exchanging bolivars, for example, to dollars was not seamless. They had to come out of the app, go to their banking app, and then do this transaction. How much time would it take for you to actually fix this? Because I'm assuming that most of the issues that come in the operational world of us transferring money to RSR would be, for example, typos in the references. from the backing app to sending the money to the app, that kind of stuff. So I would think that this is an important issue to fix to avoid typos.
Yeah, and so there's like different layers of solutions. So one layer is basically, just simple validation, where it's like basically the app code is running checks to be like, does this number have the right number of digits and stuff like that. That stuff's all pretty easy. We've implemented a fair amount of that already. There's probably a little bit more we can do. In the long term, connecting, like I said, connecting the app to people's accounts directly, where you basically can like sign in to your bank account from the Reserve app, and then when you make a transfer, instead of you having to go to your bank account, our system just interfaces with your bank account directly and causes a transaction. That's going to reduce further errors, and it's just going to make it an easier experience for users. I believe we're going to do that, but it's not actually high enough priority for us to do that right now. Like we have sort of bigger issues right now. We could scale to probably millions of users the way that it works right now. And so we don't have to fix that. And so we generally are focused on fixing the things we have to fix. But that's something where I'm pretty confident we can do it, and I think it's likely that we will do it. It's just not on the immediate roadmap.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I suppose just to jump in on that, the obvious question would be, what is the biggest barrier to scalability at the moment?
Yeah. Let me think about that for a second. Yeah, I mean, like on the margin, meaning like, the biggest barrier to immediate scaling, I think really is this customer support system that I referenced, where like, yeah, our transaction system could support significantly more people transacting right now. And we're just having this issue where we're starting to get to the point where like people go to Twitter and post angry threads about how, they're worried that we're stealing their money, or they're upset about the level of service degrading because of this chat issue. And so that's the thing that the team is like most urgently focused on right now. And so like at the beginning of April, as you guys might know, we basically stopped allowing people to just directly join. Now when you join, you get put on a waitlist again, and you need to get an invite from somebody. And we're limiting the amount of invites because if people join too quickly, we're just going to have a compounding issue with this customer support system. So that's the biggest one right now. Once we have solved that customer support bottleneck, we'll be able to basically issue a lot more invites per week and start increasing that growth rate again. And then thinking further down the line, there are problems that are harder to describe in a couple of sentences, where a lot of stuff we deal with is like it's like problems end up having components that span across many subjects in the organization, including technical, logistical, and legal, where it's like, okay, we could set up the system this way, and it's like, that has this legal problem. It's like, okay, well, we could set it up this way. It's like, that's going to be really hard to technically implement, and it'll fail like 20% of the time. And it's like, okay, we could set it up this way. It's like, well, that requires tons of labor, and so you end up having like a logistical problem. And so it's always like a puzzle of how do you handle all those things. So I'm gonna choose not to go into detail on some of those other further out problems. But like when we're thinking about scaling just the number of banking transactions, there's some of those problems where it's like, okay, we have to make sure that we're doing things in compliance. We have to make sure that they work technologically. And so that's some of the stuff that we're thinking about that's a little bit further out right now.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Hey, Nevin, I have a couple of queries, if that's right.
Go for it. So, you mean like basically, like the PayPal like system of offering people a bonus to join kind of thing?
Also for the recruitment, we talked about that.
Oh, yeah. No, great question. That completely failed. And I think that the problem is that, and it was actually evident from some comments that people made pretty early on. I think people predicted this actually. It's sort of like most people don't really want to refer a friend if the friend feels like they might be getting referred out of like a selfish motivation for that person to make money. That's like kind of an awkward thing to do. If you're a professional recruiter, that's like what you do, so it's not a big deal. But people don't really want to do that with their friends. So, and I haven't really done anything to try to fix the system, honestly, just because the rest of our recruiting pipeline has been working so well. So we just haven't really needed to fix it. But yeah, that experiment didn't work, unfortunately. I still think that maybe we could tweak it to make it more comfortable. I'm not sure, and we might get around to doing that sometime. But what we learned actually was we realized that just posting on Hacker News is a really great way to find smart software engineers. And so that's been the biggest flow for us. We have recruiters and we have an internal sourcing system where we send out cold emails, and those do sometimes yield people that we want to make offers to. But so far, the best channel for us has just been a very, very simple Hacker News post that takes like almost no time. It's like literally like a couple minutes a month. And then we just get a stream of good candidates. And so then we get to put all of our time into, talking to them and assessing them. So that's going well, but the referral system did not work at all.
No, I kind of figured that myself. I remember sort of raising a couple items like that. The other one, just to sneak in before I ask this time, is understandably listening to where you're at the moment. I think it's great progress, but what's the sort of gut feel or any sort of insight into other countries coming up, considering there are some slight hurdles to jump through for the moment?
Yeah, other countries. So I think maybe I forget if I've mentioned this before, but like we at this point we get inbound contact from people in Lebanon pretty regularly, like almost every day, saying like, hey, the thing you're doing in Venezuela, can you do it here because we need it? And we want to do that, but I guess my answer is kind of the same as what I've said before on this, which is that like we basically need the right leader type to start an operation in a new country like that. And we also we're in a stage where things are complicated enough to build and scale up in the countries that we're operating in that it would probably be a mistake to try to expand horizontally right now. It's really tempting. We really want to do it. But I think that realistically, it's likely that we'll stick with like a relatively smaller focus for the next while until more things are built out and more systematic. So like with that chat issue, it's like, do we really have the resources to be solving things of that type that are kind of early problems and also going to market in new countries? The answer is probably no. So it's like obviously everybody, including everybody on the team, is very hungry to get there, and it's definitely still the strong intention to do that. But I think that unless we were to find unless the perfect person were to fall into our lap for Lebanon or China or another country that we're interested in, we probably won't expand soon. The reason why it could make a difference if we find the right person is that they could basically manage that whole operation and solve a lot of problems without adding too much burden to what we have to deal with. There would be some because we have to coordinate, but there's a very rare breed of person who can figure everything out, themselves and can manage people and hire people and so on without any support. Basically, if somebody has built a business and sold it for $100 million or something in the past, that's an indicator that they might be one of those types of people. So that's kind of the wild card that could potentially change that answer and accelerate things, is if we find a person or people like that who want to join the project from those other countries.
Yeah, cool. Thanks very much for answering that.
Yeah.
Hey, Nevin, I have a question for you.
I guess we don't have a system for choosing who goes, so EB, what's your question?
I just touching on a little bit of what LMC was just saying. I think in your most recent Medium post, you mentioned that there were 2 team members in Europe. I was just wondering, are they just team members like engineers or customer support, or are they like the leader type that are trying to get something started in a new country?
Good question. Yeah, they're not leader types. One is a graphic designer, and the other is an engineer. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Hi, Nevin. Michael from Ireland here. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I've got 2 questions. One, how far along are you with the iOS app? And 2, of the 3.8 billion that were, put onto exchanges, how much of that has actually been, put into the system, and how much has been held back?
Good questions. So, on the iOS question, it's not actually a matter of a process where we have to do a bunch of work to get to the point of being able to deploy it. I mean, there's a little bit of work you have to do to deploy a React Native app on iOS as well. But it's more about us having actively made the choice not to do that. And the reason is because once you do, then every time you make a change, you have to make sure that it works on both platforms. And so it just makes every single thing that you do in the app more expensive, and it makes it so that you're in practice going to have to spend more time fixing bugs or solving little issues that come up because you have these 2 variants. So basically we had the plan of let's hire more, let's build out the engineering team a bit, and then let's start supporting iOS. As I mentioned, building out the engineering team has been going well. We still don't have a specific date for when we're going to do that, but it's every time we hire a new engineer, we get closer to that being the right thing to do. We have already signed up and created an Apple account and gotten that all set up, because that takes sometimes a fair amount of operational work. So we're basically ready to do it whenever we want to do it, whenever it's the correct prioritization. But the way that it relates is, for instance, going back again to that operational chat issue, it's if we're dealing with an issue like that and we're trying to support 2 different platforms at once, then maybe that means that we have to spend 1.5 times as much development time making that switch. And so it's always better to try to get as many early things like that dialed in as possible before you start trying to support multiple platforms. So again, apologies for the vague answer, but I think we want to do it soon. Sometime in the next few months, we will probably be comfortable to start supporting iOS. For your second question, I've actually thought a bit myself about whether it's the right thing to do to publicly disclose our treasury operations or not. So with those, 3.8 billion tokens, should I say, okay, we're going to sell some, or this is how many we've sold, or we haven't sold any yet. And the problem is if I were to come out and say, well, we haven't sold any yet, then, people would keep asking, okay, well, when are you going to sell them? Or, keep asking well, have you sold any yet? And the thing is, I think that, our objective is to not disturb the market at all, in as much as that's possible, or get as close to that as possible. And what I've observed is that, in the past, any times that we have sold tokens, I think we've been able to do it in a way that really doesn't disturb the market very much at all. I think that the thing that is more market disturbing is actually often the narratives that can go around, or the FUD that can be created by by talk about these things. I think that those things can actually cause more market impact sometimes than the tokens themselves. And so I've decided that in service of not disturbing the market, it's actually better for us to not talk about any treasury operations directly. So obviously we have the slow wallet and we have the system of public disclosure, which I think is important, but that does come at a cost. When we make those public disclosures, it does cause some amount of reaction in the market, and that's not without cost. And so I think so that's like the background as to why I'm not going to directly answer that question. Is just because anything that I say about that might just invite further questions and might cause more concern than is necessary. And in general, as I've said before, we've put quite a lot of effort into making sure that any operations we ever decide to do like that, we do very carefully. And I think that we've been able to build trust with at least a portion of the community over the course of time, that we're not going to do things that are irresponsible or rash with respect to any of those token operations, the way that I know some projects have done in the past. And so, so I hope that we can continue to build that trust. And I think that trust is really important. And that's part of why we take so seriously the way that we conduct any of those operations. Isa, I think you seemed like you wanted to ask a question a couple ago. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yes. So thank you for asking me, and thank you for being here. I don't know if you can hear me very well.
Yep.
My question was related to those numbers. You cannot disclose, and I understand that. But my question was on what sort of impact do you think that kind of reveal would have on as investors and as well as on the market?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And, because of my role in the project, I can't really speculate on future price of RSR. It's probably not a good idea for me to say anything about my internal predictions about how it could impact price. What I can say that's not about price is that I think it can help the project potentially make it to the next level of notoriety. And that's important not only because of how it could potentially impact the RSR market, it's important because of how it could impact recruiting. So, a core resource for the project in the long term is, can we get, the smartest, most dedicated people in the world to come solve these problems with us. And so I'm excited for, being able to reach people, outside of the crypto space who don't ordinarily follow things in detail, that might be able to read about Reserve in a non-crypto publication of note. I'm excited also about people in the crypto space who, maybe just don't have time to follow every last little thing that's happening, for this rising to more people's attention potentially, and people saying, oh, wow, that's really cool. I didn't realize that they had made that progress. I kind of want to be involved in that. So that increase in notoriety is a core piece that I'm excited about, as well as any possible impact it could have on the market.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, actually. Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess I should say, just to be responsible there, it's like, we're working to get to the point where we can make those announcements soon. We're motivated to do it as soon as we can. But there is some uncertainty there. And so I hope that I hope I don't overset people's expectations. And obviously we don't know how press launches will go until they happen. So I'm sharing my anticipations with you guys, but I hope that you understand that these are my guesses. So, we'll see for sure. Once we really execute, we'll see what the effect is.
Nevin, can you speak on the adoption rates in Panama?
Well, So most of the usage of Panama transaction methods today are actually from users who are themselves not in Panama. And the reason for that is that Panama uses the US dollar. So there are banks in Panama that have dollar banking. And so it's common for people and businesses in particular in Latin America to have an account in Panama, sometimes because it can sometimes be easier to get that account than a US dollar account in the US. So that's actually the original reason why we chose to add service in Panama, is because a lot of our users were interested in being able to get their money in and out of Panamanian bank accounts that they have. So right now, like, I think we've seen, pretty good adoption of those payment methods. But if you're in Panama, you just live your life in dollars already. So there isn't really as much need to use Reserve as a Panamanian citizen, which is fine. Like, that's kind of what we thought. We haven't really focused on marketing to Panama because the point in the first place was actually kind of more to allow people outside of Panama to use those banks and those transaction methods.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. So looks like we're coming up to an hour. So I guess let's do, like, I don't know, one or two more questions or thoughts, like ideas. These have all been questions, but if anyone has anything they want to share that's not a question, also open to that in this smaller format.
Sorry, either you go.
Sorry, so my thoughts would be on scaling. Have you thought about doing the scaling part by yourself 100% at some point in the future?
What do you mean?
Instead of,
what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so instead of working with some other third-party like Zendesk, have you thought on developing this part of customer service as, a reserve function?
Yes, I have thought about that, and I've actually, over the past week, kind of had a little bit of a debate with some other people on the team about that, and they convinced me that we shouldn't do it now, because when you get into the details of how a customer support product like that works, there's actually tons of stuff that they've built out. Like, for instance, whole systems where a user can, like, ask a question about something and an algorithm can recognize, oh, this user is just having this normal problem, and it can refer them to a support article so that we don't have to have a customer support staff person actually answer their problem, because they can actually go check out this article and then do it themselves. That and, like, a dozen or 24 other things like that end up being relevant to providing this kind of customer support at scale. And so if we can integrate a platform that really does work and really does deliver on those promises better than our current one has so far, then we can get a whole lot of value that we just wouldn't have time to develop ourselves. And this is, something that's maybe hard to understand from the outside, is like, software development is really slow. Like, even if you have fast programmers who are great, it takes a long time to build any complicated system and hone it and make it work well with no bugs. And it's kind of the slowest resource in our project, where we have to make decisions about, like, okay, what are we going to do for the next, month, the next quarter, and you just have to deal with the fact that, like, development always just takes, like, a really long time to get right. So that's why we're not doing it now. But I do kind of have an ethos myself of, like, if you can build it yourself and you can manage to invest the time and energy and money to do that, then you have full control. And so you can just make it work the way you actually need it to. And that's kind of what led us to build the Reserve app instead of just trying to get listed on exchanges. So I could see it potentially making sense to customize it and own it ourselves in the long term, so that we're not dependent on external parties. But it looks like in the short term, it's probably going to be the right move to still depend on external parties, as long as we can like validate that things will really work the way we need to. So like right now we're like in the process of testing a different technical platform in detail to like check and see like, is it really, really, really going to work? But yeah, it's a great thought. Like I have that thought myself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nevin, I suppose my next question is a philosophical question. How do you manage the balance between, wanting that end project and having the baby steps, towards that? Especially when you see, we see stories on Twitter, how good Reserve is operating in Venezuela, how much of an impact it's having on the real people on the ground there. It must be very frustrating at times to not have that, rolled out for everybody.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And yeah, it's a good question. I think that, and one of the weirdest parts about it is the disconnect between the reality for the users, the reality for the core team, and then the reality for the larger community, because it's sort of harder to track from outside. And so one thing that we are about to experiment with is I just hired an investigative reporter that I'm friends with to just spend some time talking to Reserve users and telling their stories in some detail for our community to read and understand. Like, this is what it's like for people who are using the product, to try to make that like a little bit more accessible. But yeah, I think honestly the speed at which things are going, and the rate at which we're solving problems, and the rate at which we're going to be able to scale is actually very like satisfactory for me and for the people working directly in the project, because we see the micro progress all the time, and it feels to us like it's going to work. The challenge is kind of like, how to reconcile that with the expectations of the broader community, where sometimes people in the broader community, it's like they don't understand why things are going the rate that they're going. They want things to go faster. They want more, they want big numbers. They want partnerships. They want the price of RSR to go up, understandably. And that's actually kind of one reason why I wanted to try out this conversational format and talk a little bit more about those challenges, is because I would like it if we're all kind of in the same boat together in terms of our understanding a little bit more. It's not easy to do, but I think that's probably the biggest challenge about it. So that's probably a good way to wrap this up. Thank you guys for hanging out, and for these questions. And yeah, like I said, I recorded this, and it seems like suitable to go ahead and share publicly. It's nothing that isn't okay to share publicly. We'll see if people are interested in this level of kind of, minutia and like inside baseball. It's, maybe not as exciting as like some simple announcements, but I appreciate everyone's time, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.